Hi, this is Emily Bowen-Moore. This is for Journalism 273 in the Meek School of Journalism and New Media. This video tutorial is an introduction into Photoshop. We will be using this pixel-based program to execute your digital design for your mobile app. And I have a student example pulled up here, but I want to show you a little bit about the interface that you're going to be working with Photoshop. It's a little bit different than the other programs we're working with, Illustrator and InDesign. However, you have windows which are similar, and you can access those in the very top menu under Window. If they're not visible, you can make them visible. Photoshop will have a lot more icons for those windows, but those can be expanded just by clicking the arrow buttons there. You also have your panel at the top, which adapts to the particular type of tool that you're using. So if I were switching to the type tool, I would get my type options here. Now you're not going to have as many type options as you have in Illustrator and InDesign here because we don't really do type for print in Photoshop. It's strictly for web or for editing photos and stuff like that that are all pixel based or raster based. So you also have your tool bar here. Again, you can look at different views of that. And the arrows on the bottom corner of each tool, if you hold down the mouse, you will get multiple tools here. And we're not going to be using all of these for the assignment, but you might use a couple to a few of these here. Now your selection tool is going to look a little different. It's got 4 arrows here, and it's also got an artboard tool. We'll mostly be using the move tool, and that will allow you to select objects and move them around. Now, unlike InDesign or Illustrator, we cannot double click inside of a box that we select and access the type tool like you can in other programs. Everything is going to have to be selected separately. Another thing that you're going to have to get used to with Photoshop is you are going to have to pay attention to your layers. For every little thing you create on an artboard, you will create a layer. The minute I click on an artboard, for instance, if I were to add a text box up here, I would have a automatic, here we go, we're on artboard 2 here. I would have an automatic layer created the minute that I create that text box. So I can go back to my move tool and select objects and delete them. You can also delete them by right-clicking on that layer in your layer window, and you can delete that particular layer. You can also click and drag them down to the trash bin down here. Okay, so you don't really have to create layers prior to putting anything in that layer. The minute you create it in your artboard, it will automatically create it over here. Now notice the student hasn't really labeled these layers. It is very wise to label your layers. You can see how many, just in 6 artboards, how many layers she has. If we were doing an actual website in Photoshop or an entire mobile app, we could easily have 500 to over 1,000 layers. So it's really important to label them so that you're not going and scrolling through multiple layers that just say ellipse 1, ellipse 2, ellipse 3, that sort of thing. You can click on these and double click and name these layers. So I recommend doing that so that you can easily navigate through them as you're working on them. You can also categorize these layers. When you create your artboards, which I'm going to show you in a moment, You can group whatever's in that artboard. You can group them and create its own folder, so to speak. So this is collapsed. If I uncollapse it, I can have all of that condensed under Artboard 4. So I know that when I go to Artboard 4, over here, all of these components that I've put on this artboard are under Artboard 4. Okay, but you can select multiple layers by holding down the Shift key and work with multiple layers at once. If I wanted to move all 4 of these selections, I could move them all at once if I select them all together. You can, if you're wanting to group objects together, you would do that the same. I could group all 4 of these layers by doing Command G, and it would create a little folder like the Artboard 4 here, and I could name that whatever I want. Okay, so your Move tool will allow you to select these objects. You also have special effects, which don't get too happy with your special effects, but I can access that by double clicking in this empty area outside my layer name. And when I double click there, you've got all your special effects over here. If you want to add a stroke or outline to type, if you want to create a contour or a texture, if you want it to look raised off the surface, you can bevel and emboss it. You can add drop shadows, that sort of thing. But like I said, don't get too happy with that, or it can tend to look amateurish and somewhat immature. So you can access that again by double clicking right outside that open area next to your layer name. Okay. Now, when we want to start a new artboard, when we select an artboard, I notice I'm in my Move tool, but it will automatically switch to my Artboard tool when I click on the very edge of my artboard. So see how that switched over, and I got these little plus signs here on each side. There's usually one over here too, but since we have one over to the right, it's not pulling up. But if I want to create a new artboard, I can click one of these buttons. Now, these plus signs on all sides are designated to determine where that artboard is going to be. So if I click on the bottom plus sign, then it's going to put an artboard right below my other one. If I click out the side, it'll go to the right, and so forth. So you can layer your artboards however you want. In your layer window, let's go back to that for just a moment. Something to keep in mind when you are working in your layers, you can also determine the hierarchy of your layers. In other words, if I were in Artboard 2 right here, and I were doing the text box, and also she has a background box here behind the type. So notice the background box, the red rectangle here. When I click on that, you can see the location of that. If I click on the text box, it's right above it, which means it's going to be in front of that object. So you can move around your layers in terms of hierarchy. See, by doing this, I just put the rectangle on top of the type. So now we can't see it anymore. So let me move it back so you can see. Now it's back underneath. So if something doesn't show up that you've just put in your layout, you might want to check your layers and make sure that it is above what it's supposed to be on top of. So you can move your layers around and create pecking order, so to speak. All right. In your panel at the top, when you are in your Move tool, there's two important things to be aware of, and you always want to have these checked. This auto select here and the show transform controls. Sometimes they're by default deselected, and it's important to have them selected, and this is why. Your auto select, if it's not checked, even if I'm in my Move tool, let's say I want to select this object here, the icon, the actual logo. Well, if I don't have my auto select selected here in the box or checked, I cannot select any area that I want to in my artboard. I have to go over here in my layer window and manually go to the layer in which that element exists. So I would have to find that particular logo in Artboard 2. That's the type. I would literally have to go over here and find it. By clicking Auto Select, I can literally click anywhere in my artboard and it automatically selects that layer in my window. Okay, so that's a really important one that can, quickly lead to frustration if you don't have that selected. Now your Show Transform Controls is equally important. If I deselect this, notice when I select an object, I am selecting it here in my, it is auto-selecting, but I can't see my transform controls. So I can still move it around. I can still move this around and determine where it's going to be, but I can't scale it or adjust the size. If I have the Show Transform Controls, then I can adjust the size of this. And in Photoshop, you can also scale your objects very easily. I'm going to start a new document in a moment and I'll show you how to do that. This one's missing some links and fonts here. So when you get ready to start your new document, it'll be just like your other programs. You'll go to File, New, and it's going to be easy here to select what we're working with. It automatically has a template set to the dimensions here. So we're going to go to Mobile, since we're doing a mobile app, and it gives you the different presets here for the type of device. And we are going to do the iPhone 6 Plus, and it automatically gives you your pixel range and the size, which the actual size is, I think it's 4.8 by 2.7 or something like that in inches. We are going to, only thing we're going to adjust in terms of your initial preset of your artboards is we are going to adjust the resolution. Now, we usually want low-res resolution with everything dealing with web and mobile. However, the scale of the type in terms of how we're viewing type in this type of layout, we want to make sure it's nice and crisp and not pixelating. So we want to adjust this to 400 or 401. This setting will allow us, when we place type in these artboards, it's not going to pixelate. For some reason, the ratio is different when we're working in pixels versus inches or points or picas. We're going to leave this in RGB color since we are working with web and mobile and a computer screen. And your artboards, you can either have them white, black, or you can designate a background color. I usually leave them white because if you do add a background color, you can create a box to create that color and fill it. And it allows you to edit and manipulate that box. However, if you designate your background content a certain color, it's going to stay that color and it's going to be harder to change or edit. Now your advanced options, we don't have to change anything, so just leave those as is. And now we're ready to create. Now it's going to pull up your first artboard here. And you can name this artboard whatever you like by double clicking in your layer window. And you will have to do a loading screen. So I'm just going to name this loading screen so we know that that's the case. And it's already got my background here showing that that's the first layer. And just to get you guided here, if I wanted to create that background color, I could just go grab my rectangle tool, when I create that box, it's automatically going to give me my properties here. Now, your properties are going to include your fill and your stroke, which is their outline, and your stroke weight and the type of outline, and so on. So in this case, let's say we wanted our background a lighter gray here. I could select that, and then I'm good to go. Now on my layer window, now it's showing rectangle 1, and I could easily name this layer background gray, so I know this is what I'm dealing with here, my loading screen artboard. And let's say I wanted to add another artboard. I can click on the very edge of this, and it pulls up my plus signs, and then I can literally add as many artboards as I want, depending on my topic and my screens and my tools and tasks involved. Okay? So if I were to put a text box or any type of image here, or even if I wanted to scale this layer here, which is my background gray, I can scale this to whatever without clicking any shortcut key. But say I had something that was a little bit more proportionate, or an image or something like that that I'm trying to scale to the size of the screen or the width of the screen, I can hold down my Option-Shift buttons and it will scale proportionately. So your Option-Shift buttons are going to work like they did in Illustrator. It'll scale proportionately. Now the only downside to these artboards is you are not going to have your pop-up guides. So it's important that you use your ruled guides here to help you determine the width and the alignment of your elements on the page. So it's very important, even from artboard to artboard, if you put your logo in place, make sure that it's aligned and in the same position on every artboard. Also, you don't have a text margin on these artboards, so it's really important to make sure you don't have any type or any elements bleeding off to the edge that you don't find important. So keep everything a little bit away from the edge of your artboards in terms of giving yourself a margin. All right. So this is a good introduction. This should lead you into establishing your design digitally for your mobile app design, your UiUx, and we will discuss more in class. In the meantime, be practicing getting this started. You don't have to fully execute your design in a day. So we will be working in as a lab this next week, finishing this. But I want you to get really oriented with this interface. It's a little bit different than the other programs, and it behaves a little differently. So good luck, and thank you for listening.